You are listening to Chthonia, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. Chthonia's logo was designed by J.R. Malpair. Background music is Phantasm by Kevin MacLeod. Hello, and welcome to Chthonia. My name is Breach Burke. I'm your host. This week, my topic today is the goddess Hecate. Hecate is probably, for a podcast about the chthonic realm, especially about female figures in the chthonic realm, one probably might have thought, gee, Hecate is probably who you should have started with, because she, is sort of quintessentially associated with the underworld as a goddess. She's been associated. When we think about her, she's associated with magic, with witchcraft. Certainly with the dead, with ghosts, so she's kind of thought of almost in the way Lilith is sometimes thought of as kind of like a demoness figure or something like that. Again, not necessarily by the people who still practice, some form of her worship, just sort of in the general culture. But if you have, among people who practice, say, modern witchcraft and things like that, Hecate is often associated with the waning moon, with the crone. And I'm not sure always correctly at that. There's certain aspects of her where I can kind of see where that association would be, but I don't think that's necessarily part of her nature. Now, let me just begin kind of, this, what I want to do here, how I want to approach the topic of Hecate, because she is, for a goddess who is treated as quote unquote minor in early Greek thinking, she's really not that minor at all. She kind of ends up fitting herself very much into a lot of the permutations of our way of thinking about the underworld, the way that she's thought of, just like some of the other goddess figures we've talked about who seem to have a very nasty reputation, but originally were considered to be quite beneficent. Hecate is extremely complicated, and because of that, that's another reason I've been a little bit reluctant. I know there's a whole lot of people who are very much experts just on Hecate, and I'm sure somewhere along the line I'm going to miss something very critical and important, and I don't know, hopefully those people will step in and say, hey, you didn't think about this or get to this, but because she is so complex, it's the reason also that I haven't done the Morrigan at this point, because there's such complicated figures that it requires more. Some of these goddesses I have read and studied certain pieces over and over again, and it's not that I haven't read the pieces about Hecate and so forth, but there's so much more out there than perhaps, like when I was researching my dissertation, I couldn't believe how much more there was out there about Hecate than I ever even realized. So you're aware of certain things, and then you realize you've just got the tip of the iceberg in terms of the ancient story. Thus, what I want to do is talk about Hecate in two different episodes. So what we're going to talk about in this episode is the original Hecate, okay? What we know about, from what we do know. And again, there's still a tremendous amount that we don't know about these ancient gods and goddesses. But from what we do know, what was her, what are her, what as far as we know are her origins, what and her associations with other Greek deities who are, particularly in the Olympian pantheon. I have here in my own notes, I said I've probably identified at least 6 different Hecates, okay? And maybe they're not different. I mean, they overlap with each other. I don't want to make it sound like they're mutually exclusive. But if I can list them, first of all, you have the Anatolian goddess, the one from Karina, who is probably, a lot of scholars seem to think that is where her cult originates from, and this is now in modern Turkey. Okay, so there's the Anatolian Hecate and her role there, which we will talk about. And of course, as part of this, the idea of her being a goddess of childbirth and protection, which was also her role to a certain degree in Greece, as she has a lot to do with entryways, crossroads, and keys, interestingly enough. There is the Hecate who is associated with 3 Olympians in particular, Artemis, Apollo, and Helios, which are all, Artemis perhaps not surprising. Apollo, well, he is Artemis's twin, But Apollo also, we think of Helios and Apollo as sort of having to do with the sun, with the light. Hecate we think of as, we think of her as a light bringer, but she moves in the darkness. So not necessarily an association you might expect. There is the Hecate of early Greek literature, one that's described by Hesiod and in the Homeric hymns, which are attributed to Homer, probably not written by him. But that's what they are referred to as. And we are going to look at both of, at those sources. Then there's the little bit later Hecate from the Hellenistic period, sort of onward to the early Christian period, where you have a Hecate who is kind of a savior figure. Okay, it's a time when, with the Chaldean oracles and the sort of rise to prominence of astrology. This is getting more towards the Roman Empire period. But you have this idea of Hecate Soteria, the Hecate who is a savior. Now, I should note that Hecate Soteria is actually a very old, probably one of her oldest epithets, okay? An epithet being a sort of descriptive phrase that's used to describe an aspect of a deity. Okay, so Hecate Soteria is not, that's not a new, in a way you could say that's one of her oldest ones. But where we really see that emphasized in the literature is in the later period. So that's why I want to talk about that. And that's probably going to be in part 2. Along with her comparison to the Roman goddesses, obviously Diana, who is the counterpart to Artemis, and Trivia, who is the three-headed goddess, triple goddess of ancient Rome, who is also associated with Hecate. She got a lot of different, associated with a lot of other deities. This is what makes her so complicated in a lot of ways. And, and of course her role as queen of witches, ghosts, magic, and the underworld. Something, again, that has kind of, you see it a lot in Greek drama, for instance, in the plays about her. And in poetry written about, that involves magic. Hecate is always mentioned as the one invoked by witches or the ones that have to do with ghosts. Medea goes to the temple of Hecate, in the story of the Argonautica. It's, she's always kind of had that association, but there seems to be, at least, again, I'm definitely greatly being somewhat reductive here, so forgive me, but just to kind of get a kind of an overview. There's the original Hecate, who's sort of a beneficent goddess, who rules over earth and sea and is in the underworld as well, but who's beloved of Zeus. And then you have a Hecate, who helps Demeter find Persephone. And then you have a Hecate who is kind of becomes a bridge figure, like, as someone who kind of stands at the doorway. She's someone who helps, so, kind of like a psychopomp, like Hermes is, it guides souls to the other side. And that's sort of her Neoplatonic role. And interestingly, her role that has to do with magic, witchcraft, and the other bit is actually at that point separated out into a separate deity referred to as, I believe it's Cistus. Okay. And then after that, once, of course, you get into the Christian era, she just simply becomes sort of a leader of a pack of hellhounds and demons and things like that. So you see this kind of change, and some of it, you might just say, okay, gods of the old religion become devils of the new. But, it's interesting to see how the inflection changes. And, of course, this always seems to happen with very powerful feminine deities. And we'll talk about the archetype. There's at least one site about Hecate, and I want to say it's called the Cauldron of Hecate. I'll double check on that in my notes, because like I said, I have a ton of notes for this episode, where they were talking about the Artemis-Hecate archetypal axis. And, again, keeping with our theme of looking at these chthonic and shadowy feminine figures and how they may translate into our unconscious perceptions of what we think of as the feminine, or what needs to be controlled or kept in its place. Where are these ideas coming from, and are they really accurate? Because, if we really look at who the deities are, this is not necessarily what they've become, is not necessarily what they were intended to be. And what they became has a lot to do with the way that the split psychology of our culture. Okay, so with that sort of overview, let's get into who is Hecate. Let's get into her origins. I'm going to start with a little bit from theoi.com, Theoi. That is a website, by the way, that is very good if you're interested in Greek mythology. Theo, they are actually sort of an aggregate site, and they put together not only their own summaries of each of these deities, of the ancient deities, but they also give you they list who all the original sources are, and they give you some translations from the fragments from all the original writers. So it's a very good aggregate place to find primary source material. I always recommend it to my students. Okay, so just to read from Theoi. Hecate was the goddess of magic, witchcraft, the night, moon, ghosts, and necromancy. She was the only child of the Titans Perseus and Asteria, from whom she received her power over heaven, earth, and sea. Hecate assisted Demeter in her search for Persephone, guiding her through the night with flaming torches. And that's how Hecate is usually represented, by the way, as carrying flaming torches. After the mother-daughter reunion, she became Persephone's minister and companion in Hades. 3 metamorphosis myths describe the origin of her animal familiars. Now, that's the other thing, too. Hecate is very much associated with certain animals, okay? Particularly dogs. And here in Theoi, they say the black she-dog and the polecat, a mustelid house pet kept by the ancients to hunt vermin. I think we think of polecats as being kind of like skunks. The dog was the Trojan queen Hecate, okay, and we'll talk about the Hecate story, who leapt into the sea after the fall of Troy and was transformed by the goddess. The polecat was either the witch Gale, turned as punishment for her incontinence. And incontinence, they don't mean she wasn't able to hold her bladder. By incontinence, they mean that she was unfaithful to her oaths or her vows. And Galinthius, midwife of Alcmene, who was transformed by the enraged goddess Aletheia, but adopted by the sympathetic Hecate. Okay, and Aletheia is the goddess of childbirth, who's supposed to be a child of Zeus and Hera. But Aletheia, and she was also associated with dogs. And Hecate has a role associated with children as well. Okay, just finishing up the Theoi description. Hecate was usually depicted in Greek vase paintings as a woman holding twin torches. Sometimes she was dressed in a knee-length maiden skirt and hunting boots, much like Artemis, whom she's very much like also. In statuary, Hecate was depicted in triple form as a goddess of crossroads. Her name means worker from afar, from the Greek word hekatos. The masculine form of the name Hekatos was a common epithet for the god Apollo. Okay, so we see an Apollo connection. Hecate was identified with a number of other goddesses, including Artemis, Selene, who's the moon goddess, Despoine, the sea goddess Crataeis, the goddess of the Taurian Chersonese in Scythia, the Colchian nymph Perseus, the heroine Iphigenia, the Thracian goddesses Bendis and Cotys, and we've talked a little bit about them with regard to the mother goddesses and also with regard to Ereshkigal and Inanna. And by the way, Hecate in the PGM, the Greek Magical Papyri, which is a magical work of magical spells from very, very early Roman Empire period, that really combines a lot of things, associates Hecate with Ereshkigal. And then with several nymphs, Myra, who is also considered to be like the equivalent associated with the dog star Sirius, okay, which was very important to the ancient Egyptians and also important to the Greeks, okay, and of course there you have that dog association too. The nymph Daria and the nymph Herkina. So she's kind of the phrase that comes to mind is she has her tentacles out all over the place, but she's not. I don't want to give you the impression she's a Cthulhu-like figure, because she's not at all. And in fact, the earliest discussions of Hecate, when I look at the, if I go back to Sarah Iles Johnston for a minute. Now, in case you wonder in each of these podcasts why The Restless Dead is such a heavy source for my discussion of the chthonic goddesses, it's because this is the book, and this is the scholar who has written the most about this particular subject. The Greek underworld is not a regular topic for most scholars of classical scholars. This is a subject that they don't tend to touch, is the life after death stuff. So there's a few. There's Franz Cumont, there's Sarah Iles Johnston, there's Fritz Graf, and there's a few other more recent ones focusing on some different aspects. So I make reference to parts of this book frequently because this is where I find the most, it's the best researched and it's the most thorough. and has the best synopsis of what I'm looking for. So in Sarah Iles Johnston's book, The Restless Dead, once again, she has a chapter called Hecate and the Dying Maiden. And we actually talked a little bit from this chapter last time when we talked about the Hanging Virgins, and then when we talked about the Furies as well, because the Furies are also connected to Hecate. So Sarah Iles Johnston starts out with some of the literary discussions of her as a sort of, queen of restless ghosts, that she's raging among the souls of the dead, dominion over restless souls, especially ones that were referred to as Aoroi and Baiao Thanatoi. My Greek is terrible, as I've said before. The souls of those who died before their time or violently. And of course, she points out in Shakespeare's Macbeth, the witches there are invoking Hecate. She's got this kind of association, but here's the part that I wanted to share with you. And here we go on page 204. She says, and yet none of the earliest evidence for Hecate presents her as anything but a normal, indeed rather benign goddess. The first archaeological artifacts attesting to her worship are two pieces dated to the late 6th century BCE. One is an altar found in the precinct of Apollo Delphinios in Miletus, inscribed, Boustrophedon style, to Hecate. The inscription itself does not give us much information, but the fact that it was found in front of the Prytaneum underscores the fact that Hecate had a part in official cult there. She was no marginalized goddess associated only with ghosts. The other piece is a terracotta statuette of a seated woman wearing a crown, also inscribed to Hecate, which was found in Athens. The dedicator was a man, which suggests that this statue was meant to portray Hecate herself. If so, at this period, she was imagined to look like any other goddess. So, we're going to go back, we're going to talk about, I'm going to actually read to you from Hesiod's Theogony on Hecate, as well as from the Homeric hymn to Demeter, where she is mentioned. But I want to just skip ahead here in Iles Johnston and just talk about the earlier Hecate. She says, let us go back further to Hecate's place of origin. There is general agreement that this was Caria in southwestern Asia Minor, which is supported in particular by the fact that by the Hellenistic period, her precinct in, I never know if this is Lagina or Lagina, was the largest of all the precincts there. In contrast, in all of Greece, only Aegina or Aegina seems to have had any significant sanctuary devoted wholly to Hecate. And we'll talk about those sanctuaries in a moment. By the large number of theophoric names from this area that are built on the Hecate root, H-E-K-A-T. And this, by the way, is, and this is Sarah Iles Johnston, but also I was reading an article by, I think, William Berg, and then, which was in the classical, it was in Newman, which is Brill's Classics Journal. And also in Walter Burkert. They also agree that it's the presence of the temple and it's the presence of all of the epithets that involve the Hecate root that make it seem, which make Lagina seem like the most reasonable place for the beginning of that this is where Hecate worship may have originated from, or it just seems to have its most, it's the best candidate for the origins. Okay. Thrace, by the way, in northern, which we think of as being northern Greece now, but I believe was not part of there was no Greece back in those days. I mean, it was a loose confederation of tribal states, but Thrace was considered to be sort of foreign. Dionysus is sometimes also associated with Thrace. And of course, the association with the goddesses Bendis and Cotys comes from Thrace. But again, that piece aside, this is where we see the most significant evidence of Hecate cult. And she goes on. She talks about the Hecate root with important Carian deities, and that these titles attached to her, meaning Hecate, thereby, at least by Hellenistic times, such as the greatest, Megiste, most manifest goddess, Epiphanostate Thea, and Savior, Soteria. Okay, now, again, she's mentioning that this has to do with the Hellenistic period, and that's when we actually see this title being used for her. But whether or not this is an older association that carried over later into, the Hellenistic Greece and the classical world at that time, heading into what later became the Roman Empire period, that is, we're not going to have a strict answer on that. As well as her portrayal on the friezes of her temple at Lagina, suggests she played somewhat the same roles for Caria as Cybele played for Phrygia, the city goddess, mother goddess, and all-around benefactress. Okay. Lagnitian Hecate was closely associated with the Zeus of nearby Panamara, which would support the idea that she was the leading goddess of her own city. The procession of the key, held annually in La Laguna, in her honor must have been important, considering the frequency which inscriptions refer to its officers. None of our sources explain what it was supposed to accomplish, but if it took its name from the key that was carried, then the key must have been of central importance. It must have been used to lock or unlock something significant. We know that the Laganitans erected a statue of Hecate when they built the new gates behind their city. The key may have been for these or other city gates over which she was expected to watch. Now, in fact, in addition to this kinds of idea, Hecate at the gates, she was also placed at the gates or the entryways of households. The what's the word that they use? Hecatea, or the Hecateion, which is, as she says, a statue to protect the entrance. Now, the question is, what are you protecting the entrance from? Okay, so Hecate already, she seems to have, there you can see where there can be an inference there of Hecate as a, goddess who deals with ghosts or with evil spirits, because she has the power to keep them at bay, to keep them out of the house. I frequently do these podcasts with my coffee in the morning, and then I forget to drink my coffee, and it's totally disgusting. So, okay. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. So we have this association of Hecate with gates and with keys. Okay, that seems to be part of her original role. Let's go look at, and I'd like to talk about what that means. And I think her association with dogs also is connected to this as well. When we think about dogs, again, her association with childbirth, okay, because she's also a goddess who is, at that time, appealed to for, safe birth. Thinking about it, when a child is born, that is also a kind of entryway, okay? You're coming out of the birth canal and into the world. You're making an entrance through a passage into the world. So that is another type of entry. So again, Hecate, just by her very nature, is liminal. Okay, she literally stands on the threshold. She is literally a goddess of the threshold. Perhaps as much, if not more so, than even Hermes, whom we think of as like a trickster. Although interestingly, I've not seen associations of Hecate with a trickster. She's not portrayed that way, even though she is a goddess, like a threshold goddess. And a lot of times, those that are on the threshold, they're considered to be kind of untrustworthy, like you're not really sure if they're here or there. A lot of our culture's discomfort with things, for instance, and I'm sorry, I apologize if this sounds like a digression, it's not. Discomfort, for example, with trans people. Well, which are you? You have to be one or the other. I don't trust that you're both in some way. And the ancients felt the same way. It was kind of like, well, you had to be either here or there. You couldn't be in between, because being in between was, it not only, when you cross those thresholds, certainly in ancient tribal thinking, not just in Greece, but elsewhere, when you're someone on the boundaries like that, it's like you have a foot in the other world, and therefore, you could be somebody coming with something threatening. You could be taking somebody away to some other world, or you could be do something to upset the normal flow of life, which is what tricksters do. But oftentimes, because perhaps it's time for someone to make that kind of a transition. But our distrust, and especially today, you're either for us or against us. It's like you have to be on one side or the other. There's no such thing as being able to be on both sides of something. And so when people do that, there's an automatic unconscious distrust, because we automatically think, okay, we're dealing with something that's not quite, that's something outside the norm. Now, again, the reality is that we encounter thresholds all the time in life, and that doesn't have to be, and even if it's a scary experience in some ways, it's just something you deal with. And then there are times when you are in the gap, and I'm actually at that point in my life right now where I'm in the gap, and I hate it. So I understand how people feel about kind of being between things. But yeah, again, just talking about how we kind of like things to be one way or the other. That also, by the way, might be Hecate's association with holidays like Halloween or Samhain later on. Again, as she kind of gained a different inflection in more modern pagan religion. Because, of course, she's a goddess of the threshold, and Halloween is supposed to be when the veil's thin between the worlds. So, there's a lot of the rituals and so forth, even dressing up and doing things. The idea is that you're crossing boundaries. You're either dressing up like ghosts from the other side, or if you're a man, you're dressing up as a woman, or a woman as a man, vice versa. All these kinds of things that go on where regular boundaries are gotten rid of. And we know that if we don't want to get rid of all boundaries, because then you have total chaos. So those thin boundary places are, we respect them, but they also are a bit frightening. But, so it's good to just kind of keep all that inflection in mind when you think about things like this. Let me move on to Hesiod. I want to talk about, I'm just opening up my notes here. And I'm actually reading from a translation of the Theogony by M.L. West, which is the Oxford World's Classics translation that I happen to have. It's the easiest one at hand in my collection. So let me just find I bookmarked the page, now I just have to find it. Okay, so in the Theogony, he starts, I'm starting with lines, I'm on the page with lines 399 to 431. Phoebe, who was the goddess of the moon, came to Coeus's bed of delight, and conceiving then, the goddess with the god united in intimacy, she bore sable-robed Leto, Leto being the mother of Artemis and Apollo, ever gentle, mild towards men and immortal gods, gentle from the beginning, most kindly in Olympus. She bore also Asteria. Okay, now this is interesting because this ends up connecting Hecate with Leto, who is the mother of Artemis and Apollo. Okay, whom it is good to speak of, whom Perseus later brought home to his great house to be known as his dear wife. There she conceived and bore Hecate, whom Zeus, son of Cronos, honored above all others, granting her magnificent privileges, a share of both the earth and of the undraining sea. Okay, so she's got a foot in both, right? From the starry heaven, too, she has a portion of honor, and she is the most honored by the immortal gods. Even now, when an earthly man sacrificing fine offerings makes ritual propitiation, he invokes Hecate, and great favor readily attends him if the goddess is well disposed to his prayers, and she grants him prosperity, for she has the power to do so. From all those that were born in earth and heaven were allotted honor, she has a share. The son of Cronos did not oppress her or take away from her anything of what she had been allotted among the Titans, the former gods. She keeps it even as the distribution was first made from the beginning. Nor does her being an only child, okay, that's another thing about her, mean that the goddess has received less honor and privilege in earth and sky and sea, but much more, because Zeus honors her. By whomsoever she chooses, she comes and stands in full presence and helps him. In times of judgment, she sits beside august kings. In the public gathering of the man, her choice shines out among the crowd. When men arm themselves for battle and slaughter, there the goddess comes and stands by whichever side she chooses to grant victory, and with her favor and hand them glory. She is good for standing by cavalry when she chooses to, and good again when men compete in athletic contest. There the goddess comes and stands by them too and helps them. And victorious by his strength and power, a man wins the fine prize with ease and joy, conferring glory on his parents. To those who till the surly gray, and who pray to Hecate with the strong thundering shaker of the earth, this is a reference to the sea and to Poseidon, easily the proud goddess grants a large catch, but easily she takes it away when it is sighted if she so chooses. She is good for increasing the livestock in the folds together with Hermaeus, herds of cattle and broad herds of goats and flocks of fleecy sheep. If she so chooses, she makes great out of small, less out of many. So even though she is an only child on her mother's side, she is honored among the immortals with every privilege. And the son of Cronos, by the way, this is an epithet for Zeus, if you don't know that, made her a fosterer of the young, for those whose eyes since birth have seen the light of far-sighted day. Now remember, she is listed as the goddess who works from afar. So there's also this sense of distance in Hecate, and she's now referred to as far-sighted here by, seen the light of far-sighted day. There's definitely an element of Hecate that she's working from some kind of a distance. So she has been a nurse of the young from the beginning, and these are her privileges. Okay. Now, interestingly, I was looking up some of the footnotes on this, and the translator's note on Hecate, He says, the section that follows is of a special interest for Hesiod's religious outlook. He sounds like an evangelist for Hecate, who is not mentioned by Homer and seems to have been a relatively new goddess. She has not yet developed the sinister associations she comes to have in later centuries. Okay, so that's his brief note on Hecate. And yeah, I mean, and that piece, I've also, in other research that I've done, scholars are kind of baffled by that piece because Hecate, she's not an Olympian. She's not even really mentioned among the Titans. She's not mentioned in the Titanomachy or any of the great wars between, in the creation of the world. Hesiod mentions her. Like I said, Homer says nothing about her. As we said, she's mentioned in Homeric hymn, but as we know, Homeric hymns are sort of falsely attributed to Homer, more than likely. So the question then becomes, well, where did... She seems so marginal in some of the literature, but yet here we have one of the earliest sources of Greek written literature. Because remember, before Hesiod and Homer, there's really not much. There was a Greek Dark Ages, and before that you had the writings of sort of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, Linear A and Linear B. You had the writings of the Hittites, who were sort of in Anatolia at that time. And where we get possible corroborative accounts of the city of Troy, for example, because we don't know if the Trojan War was a real event. But there seems to be that's the earliest we have from this era, and aside from Egyptian literature, of course. But this is in terms of what's been written in Greek. This is what we have, and the age of that cannot be determined because we just know that this is when there was writing and when it was written down. We don't know how old the story might have been part of oral tradition and so forth. And with Hesiod, where does he come from? I mean, there's a sense that I'm trying to remember correctly now because I've studied so many different writers. I want to say that there's I can't remember if Hesiod is associated with Aeolia or Ionia. There's kind of an elements of both. So in his language, and that could just simply be that other people have altered his writing. But I don't want to digress too far on that. The other Homeric hymn I want to talk about regarding Hecate is from the Homeric hymn to Demeter. Okay, so this is from the Homeric hymn that talks about the abduction of Persephone. Now, we've already done a podcast on that, so I'm not going to rehash that story or anything there. But as Demeter is looking for her mother, okay, here we have. This is now we're talking about Demeter here. This is about line 40. Okay, and this is from the Penguin Classics, Homeric Hymns. Who's the translator on this? Jules Cashford. So a sharp pain seized her heart, meaning Demeter. With her lovely hands she tore the veil from her long ambrosial hair, and casting a dark blue cloak over her shoulders, she streaked out like a wild bird across dry land and sea searching. But no one wanted to tell her the truth, neither the gods nor the human beings, not even one true messenger of the birds of omen came to her. For 9 days Queen Dio roamed over the earth, with flaming torches in both her hands. Now that's also, by the way, symbolic of Hecate, even though this is Demeter we're talking about. She never once tasted ambrosia, or drank the sweet nectar, nor sprinkled water on her skin, so deep in grief was she. But when the 10th luminous dawn appeared, Hecate came to meet her, holding a torch in her hands, and offering her news. She spoke to her and said, Queen Demeter, bringer of seasons, giver of splendid gifts, who of the heavenly gods and mortals has carried away Persephone and brought sorrow to your dear heart? For I heard her voice, but I did not see with my eyes who it was. I am telling you quickly and truly all I know. So Hecate spoke, and the daughter of Rhea with her lovely hair answered her not a word, but darted swiftly away with her, flaming torches in both her hands. So they reached Helios. Now Helios is the sun god, he who watches gods and men, and they stood in front of his horses, and the sacred goddess asked him, Helios, will you give me honor as a goddess, if I ever warmed your heart and soul with word or deed? The girl I bore, that sweet young shoot, lovely to look upon, I heard her sobbing the empty air as if she were being forced against her will, though with my eyes I saw nothing. But you with your rays, you look down on her from the luminous air, all the earth and sea. Tell me the infallible truth about my dear child, if you saw her anywhere, who it was, far away from me, who seized her violently against her will. Was it a god or a mortal man? And so this was so that's the episode that mentions Hecate. And of course, at the end of that hymn, when she's reunited with Persephone, and they find that Persephone has to spend part of her time in the underworld for eating the pomegranate seed, Hecate becomes her constant companion, but she's sort of only mentioned tangentially there. So this is the original source material on Hecate. Let's see. So, all right, so let's back up here. So we have Hecate in what roles so far? We have her. We've talked about her in Legina, Legina. I'm thinking like vagina, Lagina. That's pretty funny. And with the temple in Lagina and Carina in what was then Anatolia, as sort of a guarder of entryways and as a keeper of the keys. So she has, and also we see that she has a role in childbirth. And we see that she is also, now in the case of this mystery, she is somebody who illuminates the darkness. When there is something that is unknown, Hecate is the one who leads Demeter to Helios. So in other words, she's bringing her to the light. And I believe one of Hecate's epithets is Phosphoros, which is one who brings light. Yeah, so, and that might also explain Hecate's connection to the moon, because she's considered to be a granddaughter of Phoebe, the original Titan goddess of the moon. But it illuminates the darkness, especially when the moon is full. So, although interestingly, Hecate has become associated with the waning moon and the dark of the moon. So, her carrying of torches through the darkness. Now, there's one who illuminates when one is in darkness, when one is lost, when one is uncertain. One turns to Hecate, and Hecate illuminates and brings clarity. Now, I find that when it comes to Hecate's association with magic, which probably threads all the way through her associations in the entire span of her existence as a goddess. But I think that when we think of the word occult, okay, the word occult has to do with what is hidden. So you can see where Hecate would be associated with things that are occult, because she's associated with that which is in the dark. And that's what occultists seek to do, to illuminate what's in the dark, whether it be to try to see the future, whether it simply be trying to find out hidden secrets of nature. That is why Hecate seems to have that association. So we see that she has, certainly in Hesiod's view, Hesiod takes kind of a dim view of a lot of things. But he doesn't take a dim view of Hecate, that's for sure. So she has this connection. Now, the entryway thing also has to do with crossroads. I have another piece that I want to talk about here from Mark Cartwright, who wrote an article. So this is from Mark Cartwright's article in the Ancient History Encyclopedia on Hecate. He says, the goddess had unusual rituals performed in her honor, which included the offerings of food given at crossroads, road junctions, and any other sort of boundary or threshold known as the Supper of Hecate. These took the form of small cakes of eggs, cheese, bread, and dog meat, which were lit with miniature torches, or alternatively a dish of red mullet, which was usually prohibited from offerings to other gods. Hecate was also offered the sacrifice of dogs, especially puppies. That's sad, isn't it? The dog connection may be from the fact that dogs were known to eat the dead if left unburied. They also howl at the moon, of course. A further canine connection may be with the Egyptian god Anubis, who guided souls to the underworld, and the Greek three-headed hound of Hades, Kerberos, may be an earlier form of Hecate. That's right, because if you think about it, Kerberos has 3 heads, and Hecate is only shown in triple form, and she's associated with dogs. Interesting. And Kerberos is the one who guards the gate. The offerings to the goddess were made each month during the night of a new moon. The goddess was especially appealed to by sorceresses for aid in their magic and spells, and appears on surviving examples of curse tablets. Yeah, the curse tablets are something I'm going to talk about in the next, my part 2 of my Hecate episode, because I'd like to pull some examples of those, which I don't have. I know where to get. I know where to find them. I just don't have them at my disposal at the moment. According to Pausanias, 2nd century Greek CE, Greek traveler, the island of Aegina had a mystery cult dedicated to the goddess, where it was believed those suffering mental illness could be cured. Now, there's another thing. Now to get a little bit Jungian here, the underworld, okay, becomes sort of associated metaphorically, if you will, with our unconscious, with the things that go on in our minds that are not part of our conscious thoughts, part of our rationality. It's the sort of irrational part of us that is actually critically important to us. Okay, that's where our intuition is. I get very annoyed when I hear people who say that never rely on your gut feelings. Okay, if you're doing a scientific study, maybe your gut feelings aren't going to fly as much as the results of your reporting the results of your data. But you should absolutely rely on your gut feelings in day-to-day life, because generally they're more accurate than your logic. You look at something and you're basing it on information, usually about things that you don't know about or haven't happened yet, or on things that could change on a dime. So what we think of as the unconscious in Jungian terms has to do with all of these things that don't follow logical patterns, but somehow give us knowledge or put us in the right place, and are able to sort of regulate our responses to other things that happen in our environment. Okay. So mental illness is when there's sort of a breakdown of something there. And so Hecate, if she is the one who is associated, one could be cured of mental illness at the temple of Hecate. There's that association of, here's the one who can illuminate the darkness, who can take whatever it is you're suffering from and can rebalance it, or can bring clarity to it or light to it. Okay, I mean, whether that worked or not, I honestly don't know, but certainly that would explain the association. Kos, Erythe, Samothrake, Thessaly, and Miletos also worshipped the goddess, with the latter having a 6th century BCE circular altar for sacrifices to be made in her honor, the earliest archaeological evidence of her worship. Okay, so that's the 6th century, which would be about the 700s BCE. The worship of Hecate continued into the Hellenistic and Roman periods, with significant archaeological finds of votive offerings to the goddess being found at Lagina, in Caria, and in Phrygia. Yeah, we have this crossroads association. The dog association is interesting because, as he mentions, the Kerberos connection. And then there's also, again, Aletheia, goddess of childbirth, is also associated with dogs. And there's also, again, the idea of the dog star, which was very, very important. We think of the sun, the moon, and the planets, but Sirius was also an extremely important very bright figure in the sky, usually associated with the month of August. Its appearance, and there was a lot of astrological and astrology associated with Sirius, and also it had a great importance in terms of how the ancients astronomy and astrology, let's just say, without going too far off into that territory. So we have all of these things that associate her with this sort of boundary. In later times, in Roman times, you have deities like Janus and Portinus, for instance, both of which are associated with keys and with gateways. Janus is always a deity, and there are Janus-like figures that appear in all cultures. Okay, there's on one of the Aran Islands in Ireland, even there's a Janus-like figure, and what we mean by that is one that's got 2 heads, one that looks backwards and one that looks forward. And that some people think that's past to future, whatever it is, it's a liminal, it's a looking backwards and a looking forwards. And of course, the month of January is named for Janus. That's kind of the gateway month. That's the new year, right? So, and Portinus, that's where we get the idea of, comes from the word for port or portal. And usually he has more to do with ports, like with seaports and that sort of thing. And again, these deities are also shown holding keys. So you see Hecate kind of being subsumed into that. She also, again, has some of these connections to Apollo and to Artemis in particular. Sarah Iles Johnston does talk about how Artemis is kind of end up absorbing a lot of the roles of Hecate. We've talked about Artemis with regard to some of the rituals of girls moving from girlhood to womanhood. And here I'll have Sarah Iles Johnston again, page 211. She says, she mentions that one of Hecate's earliest roles in Greek literature and art was that of a wedding attendant. In this, she was similar to Artemis, who was also expected to bless weddings with her presence, ensuring the bride's safe transition from maiden to wife. As is well known, this was but one aspect of Artemis's general guardianship of the female's passage from girl to mother, which also manifested itself in her presence when women gave birth, her protection of children after birth, and even earlier in the process, her sponsorship of a variety of rituals in which girls symbolically made the transition from virgin to marriageable woman. Hecate, too, exhibited a concern for women that extended from the time they were ready for marriage through childbirth. In fact, it was undoubtedly this common range of interest that led to the early association of the two goddesses. Aeschylus credits Artemis Hecate with bringing labor pains to women. Antonius Liberalis, drawing on the 2nd century BCE poet Nicander, relates a story whereby one of the midwives present at Heracles' birth was turned into a weasel by Hera, but then in recompense was honored by Hecate and became her sacred servant forever. Okay, that's what they're calling a polecat, is a weasel. which suggests that Hecate was a goddess whose midwives particularly serves. Ennius mentions that Truvia, i.e. Hecate, could bestow children on fathers who prayed to her. Hesiod described the birth goddess Genetilis as another form of Hecate. The Chaldean oracles makes Hecate the goddess through whom grace in the material cosmos was created. Okay, that I'm not going to get into because that's the next episode we're going to get into that. So Sarah Iles Johnston, just looking through this, also speculates that she is talks a little bit about this role of hers. And she says at one point, it's probable that Hecate's concern with the birth and nurturing of children was one she brought with her into Greece from her homeland. The east frieze of her Hellenistic temple in Lagina shows her helping to protect the newly born Zeus by presenting the disguised stone to Cronus. Okay, so instead of Rhea presenting, that's the story where Cronus becomes king of the Titans after he castrates his father, Uranus, and separates the earth and the sky, which makes sense because he's the god of time. And time is what puts us into a world of separation and difference and how we measure. But then when Kronos is king of the gods, he doesn't want any of his children to overthrow him because, of course, there's a prophecy that will happen. So he swallows all of his children as they are born, and this gets his wife very upset. So what she does is, because really he's not doing anything better than what his father did. His father was just kept, every time his children would be born, he kept stuffing them back into the earth, So, it's really another version of that swallowing up. So she decides with Zeus, they wrap a stone and he swallows the stone instead, and Zeus is taken and hidden away in a cave. Until he can grow up and challenge his father. The Lagentian friezes are only evidence for Hecate's involvement in this birth. Similarly, only at the Lagentian temple does she participate in the myths represented on the west and north friezes, which show the Gigantomachy, and a treaty being made between Amazons and unidentified warriors. Krauss suggests, correctly I think, that the roles Hecate plays in these friezes aligns generically with those that were celebrated at this, her biggest cult site. The artist wishing to express her locally popular roles through well-known Greek myths introduced Hecate into established stories where she formerly had no part. She also goes on to talk about how Hecate becomes associated with the protection of children, like especially as Enodia in Thrace, where part of her role as standing at the doorway and protecting is to keep spirits out who might kill or destroy, children or make women die in childbirth. So again, these dark goddesses have this connection to the more dangerous parts of birth and giving birth. I kind of want to get to a point where I can sum up here because I'm giving you a lot of information here from all over the place, and some of this is more appropriate to part 2 of this. All right, yeah, here we go. So first, let me just sum up this part from Iles Johnston, and then I'll give my own summary, and we'll call it an episode at that point. When Hecate entered Greece, she continued to serve as a goddess of women's transitions in cult, sharing the role with Artemis, but in myth, Hecate was subordinated to Artemis by being moved into a variation in the role of mythic victim. This role brought her even closer contact with the vengeful ghosts she was already believed to avert. This side of her persona moved to the forefront, especially in myth and literature. Of course, it was not only the souls of women who died in transition that were apt to return and cause trouble, although they formed the largest group of such souls in myth, probably also therefore in folk belief, because women's roles in life were more sharply defined, and women were thus more likely to die in a state considered incomplete. Occasionally we hear of male Aori, and both men and women could be biothanatoi or ataphoi, the two other categories of souls most likely to become problems for the living. In magical texts of late antiquity, Hecate was expected to avert all types of ghosts or lead them on against the unfortunate. In earlier times, it was surely hoped that the Hecatea erected outside of houses would avert all sorts of ghosts as well, even if they were erected specifically to protect against the sorts that would particularly attack women and babies, as I surmised earlier. And again, this is Iles Johnston, page 249, if you have this copy of the book. Hecate's association with Aori and the myths we have been discussing was one of her connections with the ghostly world, but it was not the only one. It was all these elements in combination that led to her, rather than Hermes or other god, becoming their leader. So she's talking a little bit about how she gains that role. But we see that she, and as she points out, a lot of Hecate's roles, once you had the cult of the Olympians, become taken on by Artemis. And I've always felt, Artemis is a hunting goddess. She has her her animal is the stag. She also runs with sort of hunting dogs and with the deer. And Hecate at night rides also with her dogs and her weasels and whatever else in the underworld. And you have this, and you have this sort of close connection between the goddesses. They both have associations with the moon in their own way. And in Hesiod's version, at least, they both share, Leto is the mother of Artemis and Apollo, but she's also the grandmother of Hecate, which kind of, and interestingly, makes her younger than, if she's a granddaughter of Leto, then that makes her actually younger than Artemis and Apollo, which is kind of interesting. And then, as I'd mentioned in previous episodes, like the sacrifice of Iphigenia, where Hesiod said she actually becomes the goddess Hecate after, when they sacrifice her. And Sarah Iles Johnson does talk about that, how, the outraged victim then becomes becomes kind of the leader of the outraged victims, if you will. Now, I mentioned earlier the Artemis Hecate archetype as a model of at least one site that likes to reflects on and talks about Hecate at length. I believe it's the Cauldron of Hecate. She says, she talks about this and talks about it as an independent feminine archetype. Because Hecate, remember, she's an only child, she's unmarried, and Artemis, that's something that she shares with Artemis. They're both sort of virginal goddesses. And thus they're not fulfilling what was, as Sarah Iles Johnson says, the sharply defined role of women as being, becoming mothers and marriageable. So this was something that, even though these goddesses may have been respected, certainly as that translated into gender roles and into social roles, that was certainly something that was not to be encouraged. So it's something you sort of treat with respect and appease, but you don't want these deities to make your daughters childless, or to turn them into, or to take them away, or have them run off with the wrong person. All of these things that for some reason still seem to be an issue with people today. We've kind of setting up this very sort of complex gateway figure that is in Hecate, who is both, again, like a lot of these chthonic deities, they're or goddesses with their foot in the chthonic. It's sort of like they deal with prosperity, with bringing children, with extending the family, but also with cutting it off. So we're going to talk more about Hecate as a savior figure, and then also her later more negative associations as you move through the Roman Empire and, of course, the early Christian period and so forth. But we'll do that in a part 2. So in the meantime, just a quick plug. Please check out Chthonia.net. You might be listening to this podcast on metapsychosis. I'm still waiting to see when that's, when the sort of launch interview is going to be put up. I have to have a conversation about that this week. So please check it out. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up. My book, Death and the Maiden, is now out. Okay. I will be posting information about that if I have already, but I'll do it again as I get updated information to Twitter, to Instagram, and to my account on Facebook as well. Please check that out. I think if you're interested in this subject, I think you will find it. I spent a long time researching that book, so I think you will find it interesting in the ideas presented there if you're interested in this topic. I also want to encourage you, if you're interested in supporting the work that I do, please go to patreon.com/Chthonia and become a patron. Patrons are going to get other kinds of cool stuff and previews and, and shout outs and extra videos and things. If you would like to support my work, please check that out. And I want to give a big thank you to all the patrons that I have already. Your contributions are helpful in helping me keeping this going. And with that, I think I'm going to, I'll stop talking for now because I'll find a way to keep talking. And we will talk more about Hecate in the next episode. Bye-bye now.